Hi, LaShawn. This is Amanda Tho with AdvancedNet. Can I give you a host responsibility so I can go and help with other rooms?
Sure.
All right. And then I assume other people will be in the session soon and you can assign other responsibilities if you need to.
Okay.
There you go. All right. Thanks.
Thank you. Good morning. You're muted.
Hey, LaShawn,
Yes, ma'am.
will they have access to share their slides when they get in?
I just made access for them to share their slides when they get in. So I was
Okay.
just made a host for this.
Okay.
I came into the room and the person who was here was like, "Can I make you the host?" So now, so now I'm the host of this. So I don't know if there was any other setups that anybody needed. I did just create the ability for them to be able to share their slides though.
Yep. Well, that's all I need. These is undergrads. They, this is not this is not, this is not over the top. This is not over the top professors like myself who are, gonna lose their minds. You know how we do. We are real. So that's probably why they put me. That's why they probably put me to lead the undergrad panel. Because, Sean, I'd be like, "What? We gonna get it done? It's gonna be whatever it's
gonna get done. It's gonna get done.
It's gonna get done. We gonna be all right. It ain't the end of the world. I see people have joined the session.
I'm gonna make you the host.
Okay, that's fine. That's great. You can make me the host. That's fine. I can be the host, and I know that Tyrek is here. Miss Burns, do me a favor and give me how to properly pronounce your first name.
It's Makira.
Okay, so you two will be the only ones presenting. I know there was 4 people on the panel. One is presenting in a co-authored paper tomorrow, and then someone else was not available due to COVID. So it'll just be us. We'll start at 11:45. I'll introduce myself as the chair. Tyrek, I haven't gotten your paper. So I'll just listen to your presentation and then critique from there. Ms. Burns, I have received your paper, and I have read it. So I'm excited about what we're going to discuss today. I know that's being recorded so that other people will be able to come back in and listen and as to what you guys presented. So we'll get started right at 11:45. So I'm just going to turn my camera off and mute myself until that time frame. Okay.
I have a quick question.
Absolutely.
So this is just a recording and no one will be watching live. It's just like you're gonna record and then upload.
People can come in live. So from my understanding of this, this is a virtual conference. And so those who have registered will be able to come into the link. The difference is that they'll be watching in such a way that it's forward facing so that they won't show up in the queue that we're seeing. So right now you see that there is us three and then Cody and then LaShawn. They are inside they're inside of the group and they'll be listed almost like participants, if that makes any sense. Everyone else that is watching is going to be on the outside, and questions will come in and I'll be able to see those questions if people are in the audience, but they're not going to show up in this virtual reality that we see right now because we're on the inside, if that makes any sense.
Yes, I understand. And also I didn't make like a PowerPoint or anything like that. I thought that we were just like presenting the like paper, so just speaking. So I apologize if that's what we were supposed to do.
This is in Copes, right? Whether this is in Copes virtually or this is in Copes in person, this is still in Copes, right? We are a family, and so there's not the same levels of pressures to have a slideshow presentation if you do not have one. Those things are just fine. It would have been helpful to have one, right? Especially since we are in a virtual space. But if you don't, there is nothing wrong with that. You know, you'll be allotted the same 10 to 15 minutes to go ahead and describe. Mr. Edwards, do you have slides?
Yes, I do have some slides prepared, and I was gonna ask you, can I still send you the paper? Is that possible?
Absolutely. You can definitely still send me the paper, although I don't have it. I mean, it's not, I'll definitely, read over it and then provide comments. I'll do so probably the same way after you guys both present. So we have a lot of time in our session because there's only 2 of you guys presenting. So it'll give us some breath and time. And we are at the 11:45 mark. So as someone being punctual, we'll get started on time. So thank you for those of you that are watching live and that are watching, that will watch on the replay. I am Dr. Sharice Janae Nelson. I am an assistant professor at Southern University in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. The state of Louisiana is special to me because it is the land of my known ancestors. And so in many ways, I have sojourned back home. I find it a great joy and an opportunity to work with undergrad students, especially those students that are looking into research and to replace me one day. And so I'm very excited about the panel that we will present to you today. We have Ms. Burns, who is from the University of Florida A&M, an institution that has been highlighted in the news because of a famous alumni in Keisha Lance Bottoms, who is doing great things in the city of Atlanta. And she will be presenting to us about the role of Blacks inside the Democratic Party and what that looks like. And then we have also Mr. Edwards, who's from Loyola Marymount Institution. Am I correct, Mr. Edwards?
I'm actually from Claflin University.
Okay, he's from Claflin University, and will be presenting to us as well. We will go in alphabetical order, which is usually the custom here at INCOPES, and so that means Ms. Burns, you are up. We are starting at 11:46, and so if you would like to place a timer for yourself, you have until 11. I'm in Central Standard Time. I apologize. It is 12:46, right, Eastern Standard Time, and we're getting ready to start at 12:47. You will have until the top of the hour to present, and then we'll turn it over to Mr. Edwards, and then I'll provide feedback on both presentations. So the floor is yours, Mrs. Burns. Ms. Burns.
Thank you so much for that introduction. So for today, I'm just going to provide pretty much like a reflection of my paper. And so African Americans were known to be aligned with the Republican Party since the days of Abraham Lincoln. The Democratic Party had denied African Americans from basic civil rights, defended slavery, opposed Reconstruction, founded the Ku Klux Klan, Black codes, perpetrated lynchings, and much more. The Democratic Party's long history of discrimination is one that can never be forgotten. The Republican Party was founded in 1854 as an anti-slavery party where they fought to abolish slavery. And during the era of Reconstruction, federal troops were stationed in the South to help secure the rights of freed slaves, and the evolution of Black legislators began. So 22 Black men legislators were Republicans and elected to serve in the United States Congress by 1900. And Democrats planned to keep Blacks from voting, but failed, which caused them to create a new creation of a new strategy which targeted the Blacks' votes for Democrats. Moreover, it is evident that supporting the Democratic Party is already an expectation as a Black individual. Any person that votes outside of the party is often looked at as like frowned upon in the Black community. Famous people in the Black entertainment industry have been publicly attacked and canceled in the Black culture for expressing their political beliefs that were outside of the normal expectations of Black voters. A famous rapper and actor known as Ice Cube has received much backlash this past 2020 election season due to his involvement with the Trump campaign. Ex-fans stated that they would not be supporting him even after Ice Cube stated, "Black progress is a bipartisan issue. When we created the contract with Black America, we expected to talk to both sides of the aisle. Talking truth to power is part of the process." This reveals that Blacks are condemned for anything that is relating to the Republican Party or conservatives. What does this mean for Blacks in the Democratic Party in the future? Several Blacks have used their political platforms to voice their opinions and concerns as it pertains to this topic. American commentator, author, and political activist Candace Owens launched the Blexit movement, which encouraged African Americans and other minorities to leave the Democratic Party and register as Republicans. Owens previously identified herself as a liberal, but later became a conservative. The conservative youth, who are the children and grandchildren of these Black lifelong Democrats, see their people's support of the party as futile and argue that Democratic policies have been detrimental to Black communities. So my paper pretty much presents the history of the Democratic Party and how it relates to Blacks.
Excellent. And before time, Mr. Edwards, if you would like to go next, let me make sure that you can share your information. Are you able to share your slides? Let's see. Participants, and then Edwards. Okay, yeah.
Mind me seeing?
Yep, we can all see them.
Okay, can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can hear you as well.
All right, awesome. Good morning and good afternoon to everyone. My name is Tyrek Edwards, and I am currently a senior at Claflin University studying mass communications. And I had the opportunity to do my research presentation on Colin Kaepernick, and I entitled it "History Repeats Itself: Colin Kaepernick and the Legacy of the Black Activist of the Black Athlete as an Activist." So let me just go ahead and there we go. All right, so I wanted to ensure that I was capturing the full details of what was going on in society at the time. So I've noticed that systematic oppression and hatred have been woven into the very essence of the United States of America since its inception. It is an illness that has been given provisions to grow and increasingly cause destruction upon African American citizens. As the world faces a biological hazard and facing disturbance from another sickness as well, racism. In his appearance at the 2017 ACLU, SoCal's Easton Monroe Courageous Advocate Award, Colin Kaepernick, activist and ex-NFL quarterback, exclaimed, "We must confront systemic oppression as a doctor with a disease. You identify it, you call it out, you treat it, and then you defeat it." Kaepernick is an exemplary yet unlikely figure in the fight for equality. Prior to his silent and controversial protests, he only garnered public attention for his football acumen. Though the risk of losing his job for taking such a public stand was imminent and being cut from the San Francisco 49ers was available, he was also not picked up by another football franchise, and that led to his emergence as a philanthropist and an activist. Now, my driving question is, how does Colin Kaepernick's movement differ from the efforts of men like Muhammad Ali, Tommy Smith, and John Carlos while directly continuing their missions? As we know, these were prominent men in the world of sports, but they also spoke out against socio-political issues that were happening around them. And in my study, this is what I was arguing. And it's obvious that Colin Kaepernick is standing on their shoulders, but I wanted to show how is his movement different? What makes his stand different than these other men? And the sacrifice of this one man has impacted millions over the country and globally, and that's something to note as well. I was able to look into many different pieces of literature, and also forms of just written research from Twitter, from different books, different articles, and even YouTube was a very fascinating resource for me to use just to get feedback on what people thought about him, but also to get what he was saying about his own steps. And one that I found in particular that was extremely important was an article by Jared Bell, who was an NFL columnist for USA Today Sports, and he directly compared Colin Kaepernick's knee to Tommy Smith and John Carlos at the Mexico City Olympics in 1968. And I have a graphic of there where somebody actually combined them to just show the comparison. Um, and in this article, Bell Bell said that similar to Carlos and Smith, Kaepernick used his stage of television in a very well way, but he also had the tools of social media. He has Twitter, he has Instagram, and he was able to create a global reach. Whereas Carlos and Smith only had TV, which reaches a lot of people. But we also talk about in modern day, like social media is so big and it's just growing each and every day. Excuse me. Much like Muhammad Ali, uh, Kaepernick um, Kaepernick was one to refuse. So Ali was refusing to draft to the fight against the Vietnamese because that was not something he believed in, and Kaepernick refused to stand for the national anthem. So you see both of them with political dissent, and people were uncomfortable with it. People didn't really a lot of people didn't agree with them, but there were people who of course were on their side, and the actual practices of society did not reflect the claims of equality and freedom. That's what Kaepernick was kneeling. So, a history of Black athletes as representations of change makers are highlighted in a book that I read called "Globetrotting: African American Athletes and Cold War Politics," which was written in 2012 by Dr. Damian L. Thomas, and he ties Kaepernick to a lengthy genealogy of athletes who came before him that took problems of society into their own hands, such as racial prejudice, racial inequality, and militarism. They took them head on without any fear, without any shame of what the rules would have. So my research methods, like I said earlier, I looked a lot at Kaepernick didn't really have any solo videos of him actually just speaking out. It was more so gaining words from his award speeches, gaining his context from when he would do philanthropic events and efforts, and just grabbing his comments from those. I was also looking at his tweets, looking at different news articles, what they were saying about him, and how obviously some of those articles are aligning with him and some of them went against him. So it was very um, productive for me to look at both of those sides, just to get both viewpoints of these things. And I want to highlight that my research doesn't stand alone; it doesn't stand by itself. there are other researchers or other people who went out and actually kind of spoke about similar things. One in particular was Mr. Charles Okonkwo, who was actually made a graduate thesis, and he entitled it "The Knee That Shook America: A Case Study of Colin Kaepernick and Historical Analysis of Protests." And he wrote this in 2019. His driving argument about race in America concludes that Kaepernick's athleticism and exceptional skill should have actually protected him when he decided to express his political opinions instead of, you know, ostracizing him from the NFL. And I definitely agree with Mr. Okonkwo's argument, and I see that it aligned very well to what I was actually researching. So, oh, excuse me, I skipped a slide. My apologies. So if I were to, have a magical interview with Mr. Kaepernick, there are just these are a few questions that I would actually like to pose to him just to further my study, further my research. One important one was, the term activist can be, we can see that in many different ways, many different forms. And some people don't even actually take that on as a title for themselves. Um, and I wanted to know if he saw himself as an activist, or did he see himself as, just a person doing good, or did he see himself still as an athlete? I was very curious to see, what exactly he titled himself as, because I think a lot of people like to put else's. I guess it makes it easier in our society where you have to be this or you have to be this. And I think a lot of people are very multifaceted and they have many different titles. But I just want to know what he thought about himself. Did he see himself as an activist at all? Um, and another one, I just wanted to ask him about one of the comments he made. He was honored at, once again in 2017, he was honored at the ACLU SoCal's Eastern Monroe Courageous Advocate ceremony. Um, and also in 2020 at the Center Honors, and he got the W.B. Du Bois Medal. And one thing he always said was, "Love is at the root of our resistance." And I wanted to know where that mantra stemmed from. Like, did it come from a family member? Did it come from something, his own revelation? Did it come from one of his mentors? I just wanted to know where that mantra came from because it was very powerful to me. I think to understand his movement, you really have to understand that that was such a big piece in why he was fighting for what he was fighting for. And I just wanted people to understand that. And I think he did too. So I really agree with that statement. And I just wanted to kind of dig deeper into that. uh, Furthermore, I believe that Kaepernick has utilized social media and his wealth very effectively and very productively to champion the efforts in which, these weren't luxuries of his predecessors. And, his following has grown to millions now, on Twitter, on Instagram, um, on all his activity. There's just so much growth on this man's name. Um, and to be clear, Kaepernick has deployed the contemporary media landscape in a way that is distinctive and different from the ways that his predecessors have used media and televisuality. And he has used philanthropy. I'm saying that word wrong, but in unique and noteworthy ways. Um, he has created a space in between him and the ones before him. At the same time, he is still showing respect to them when he comes out here and makes his statements, when he goes about his actions. He is still showing homage and respect to the ones that came before him. Um, he has done brilliant works. He has created the Know Your Rights camp, which influences young children to be politically intelligent, but also to be physically active. And he has donated to millions of dollars to major organizations, like Asada's Daughters, um, United We Dream, just to name a few. And now we see him coming into this landscape of literature where he has his own publishing company called Kaepernick Publishing. Um, and he's just set to put his story out there on the forefront. You see the deals with Disney, working with Ava DuVernay, just getting his story out there, so other people can see it, other people can understand where this whole movement stemmed from. It wasn't just a thing for him to gain attention. I really believe that it was something he was feeling as a result of the police brutality, as a result of the inequality, as a result of just the unfairness of this system that we have in the United States. Um, And I know that he was motivated by the Black Power movement and Black nationalism. And more generally, their protests reflected deep divides in the U.S. society. And Kaepernick was hardly the first athlete to promote political activism.
Did we lose Mr. Edwards? It appears that we have lost Mr. Edwards. And so when he comes back in to the atmosphere, we will let him finish up and conclude with his thoughts, and then we will go to dissecting the paper. So first, Ms. Burns, I enjoyed your paper, and I think in many ways it speaks to where a lot of my undergrad students are in questioning this binary choice of the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, and I enjoyed your ability to dig through that. Now, one of the things that I would suggest for you in this paper is to center what your hypothesis is or what your thesis is, because it read more like an opinion piece where you have provided support more than a research paper. And that could have been accomplished just by centering your thesis, right? Stating your question, or stating what you look to then address and to explore, and then going about doing that. I think you did a good job through looking at historically the switches. Mr. Edwards is joining us again, so we'll give him an opportunity to come back in. I think you did, Mr. Burns. I think you did, Mr. Burns, Mrs. Burns, Ms. Burns, I think you did a great job of historically capturing a narrative of the switch. One of the things that I think would also strengthen the paper is to talk about ideology. Because you presented in such a way that doesn't explore or highlight that there was an ideological shift that happened in the two parties, right? That one of the biggest reasons that the Democrats started garnering so much of the Black vote is because of this ideological shift. And there's a book that I think that'll really help you to explore this more. It's by a fellow Rattler of yours, by Dr. Grant, who teaches at Howard University. And I have the work here prepared if I could get to my notes. Goodness, yes. It's called The Great Migration, how the Great Migration and the Democratic Party. And so the book focuses on how Blacks leaving the South and moving to the North formed what we see inside of the Democratic Party. And I think that will give undergird your paper more, because I think there's an absence in many ways of scholarly references that will strengthen this paper and strengthen your argument about this idea that it's implied, right? That Blacks are going to then go for the Democratic Party. And I would also tell you to then look at something that Charlie Diggs said, who's the founder of the Congressional Black Caucus. And he stated that that Blacks do not have a party. They have permanent interest, and that they align with the party that then represents their permanent interest. And so I think if exploring some more scholarly works, and I could provide more, but I really think Dr. Grant's book will really help you to strengthen the paper and the argument that you're making, and thinking about the role Black people have played into getting this ideological shift that we've seen in the Democratic Party. So with that being said, I want to turn back to Mr. Edwards and allow you to conclude, and then I will then present some thoughts on the work that you've presented to us.
Okay, thank you for that. I apologize for my connection issue. So let me share my screen again. Okay, can y'all see my screen?
We sure can.
All right, so where I left off at on my conclusions was that other athletes have stepped into this role of, fighting against socio-political issues. We've looked in terms of, we see the NBA, we see like women coming out here and doing big things in terms of just putting their voice to things that are more important than just their sport. And I think there are a lot of people who try to minimize their voice and just tell them, hey, just play your sport, just be entertainment. That's what you do. That's your job. Do that. But I think it's important for them to merge what's going on in the world with their profession, because I think they'll always overlap, always. And I don't think you can separate politics from the sports, in my own opinion. And I looked at an article by Michael Sorarzio and Emily Thorson, and they coined this term called athlete activism. And the article is called "Weaponized Patriotism and Racial Subtext in Kaepernick's Aftermath: The Anti-Politics of American Sports Fandom." And they talked about the school of thought that athletes want to champion forward for political movements, and athletes are also responsible for responding to the things that happen around them because of their platform. Um, Colin Kaepernick was not the first black athlete to take a stand against the atrocities in the social fabric of this country, and he surely won't be the last. I think that's something that a lot of people know, um, and that's a beautiful thing that happens. To see somebody in modern day still push forward with ideals that his predecessors had, and the next generation of change makers, they have a light to refer to. They have people like Colin Kaepernick to look to, um, and that he showed that you sacrifice for something, and you know it's going to cost you everything, but you're sacrificing for something that's bigger than you. And I just think that's a very fascinating thing, and that is the conclusion of my presentation. You're on mute.
You're muted, Dr. Nelson.
Wanted to make sure that you guys don't hear all the dinging in the background, so I muted myself. But Mr. Edwards, we just thank you for your diligence. I haven't seen the paper, and so I'm interested to see, many you quoted or cited many things, and I shouldn't say quoted, but you cited many things in your presentation. And so I'm eager to actually get the physical paper so that I can look at your references. But one book I would suggest that you definitely look at is the 50th anniversary of the Revolt of the Black Athlete. Dr. Edwards is an emeritus professor from UC Berkeley. I'm originally from Oakland, California. As one of my good friends have coined it, the land of black, the land of black rebel rousers. And so, by being from Oakland, California, I am very much aware of this long tradition. And what struck me immediately about your presentation is making more of a historical connection. And what I mean by that is that centering some theory here, right? That this idea or this ideation that Blacks should just perform is based upon the fact and the idea that Blacks have been property. And the idea that because Blacks have been property, especially athletes, male athletes represent in many ways the quote unquote buck, the buck that then would either be bred to other women or the buck that then would be sold on the auction block for great financial gain. And in many ways, athletes of today mirror that same system. And so I think your paper would have definitely been strengthened by pulling that historical thread in and then centering this theory, because it then connects, like you have done, connects Colin Kaepernick to a more grounded experience, right? And you've acknowledged this, right, in your visual images. You've acknowledged this in how you've presented today. But I think by placing that theory there and expounding on the theory, it strengthens this paper, especially because you did a great job of centering your question, right? You centered the question: what makes Colin Kaepernick different, right? What makes him different than Muhammad Ali? What makes him different than the athletes, the Olympians that participated in the Olympics and held that Black fist up? It's ironic that you had that image, because that image is in my home, right? That image is at my door. It's at my door. I leave it every day. I leave the house. I look at it to remind myself right? What my job is as far as being an activist role as an academic. And so I think that's important, right? I think that tying that historical thread is important, and it'll strengthen that, and exploring again, exploring this text will really help you to enrich that. You did a great job, I think, of making that argument, and I think that'll strengthen it. The other thing that I think would be great for you to do, because you to make this more an extensive research project, right? If you were to take this into graduate school, and were to work on this as a project, I think will make this even more extensive is for you to do a Twitter troll, right? Or no, I shouldn't say a Twitter troll, but a Twitter dig, or to dive into Twitter, especially Black Twitter, especially looking into Twitter and seeing how many times, right, have people tweeted in favor or in disfavor about Colin Kaepernick's actions, because I think it will provide a data-rich analysis for what you presented here, right? You've presented this history, you've showed us that he's different, and you've centered the question, how is Colin Kaepernick different than from others? And the biggest driver is social media, right? That's what makes him different, is his ability to harness social media in a way that his predecessors, as you stated, were not able to do. And so I think that if you were to take this project into graduate school, what I would really suggest to you to do is to do a data dig into Twitter, and looking at these tweets and then quantifying this, because I truly believe, right, that his stance is the reason we see Roger Goodell inside of the NFL making statements today, right? After the death of George Floyd, how everything was switched on his head because of the attention that Colin Kaepernick got, right? And I really feel that quantifying that is important in this space, right? Because we know as Black political scientists that quantification speaks a lot larger or a lot louder in our discipline, right? And so to be able to quantify things, I think is important. It's not the end all be all, right? But I think that your ability to be able to do that will be great. So now I want to open it up to the audience. I know that we have about 40 minutes or so. We have a lot of time for further discussion. So I do want to open it up to the audience for questions to our two student scholars who've done an excellent job here presenting in a virtual space, which can present challenges, who have spent good time on these papers, which is evident in their diligence. And so I want to open you guys up to other comments that are from the audience. So go ahead and unmute yourself, announce where you are from and your affiliation so that the students can follow you moving forward.
Hi, this is LaShonda. I'm from UC Irvine. I know Tyrek. He's a part of the UC HBCU Activist Studio West program, in that project that he did. Excellent, excellent. I'm so proud of you. I wanted to actually talk with Makira. Is it Makira?
Yes.
I wanted to give you an opportunity to actually speak to what your thesis is, because as Dr. Nelson pointed out, like, we got a good summation of a history, but what are you arguing for? Or are you making an argument? Is this just that you're trying to forward or advance some information? Or are you actually centering some kind of argument? It sounded to me, in listening to you speak, that you are perhaps making a movement that Black people should move away from the Democratic Party and align themselves with the Republican Party. But I don't know if that's what you're doing. So I wanted to give you a chance to actually speak to that for a little moment, if you could, please. Thank you.
Yes, so thank you for that. I didn't really present an argument. It's more of like an observation of arguments. So pretty much I am like observing how, like, especially with this past election, many like Blacks were paying more attention than they usually do. Or maybe that's just because I'm in college now, so I'm around different people. I don't know yet. But pretty much, people, more Blacks, and especially the youth, are starting to question the Democratic Party. I know for myself, I just grew up being Democrat just because, like, that's what my family's done. That's what I grew up thinking, if you're Black, you're Democrat. And simply, that's pretty much what my paper is talking about. How people are trying to pay more attention to that. And it presented some history of the Democratic and the Republican Party, because a lot of people don't actually know some of those history facts that I put about the Republican Party. And I am not stating that Blacks should move to the Republican Party. I'm not a Republican, but I could say that I am more conservative, but not enough to align myself with a specific party. So yeah.
So if you would give me an opportunity to comment here, I think one of the biggest things that we have to understand fundamentally about the system, and this is where I think students have a misnomer about the system. And this could be included in your paper or not included in your paper, but I just think this is an opportunity of a learning moment. So one of the biggest things that I explain to students before we get into political ideology is that one of the biggest reasons we have a two-party system is because we live in, we do not have a unitary system, right? We live in a federalist system. And inside of a federalist system, and inside of our federalist system, we are still arguing about where the power should lie. And so when we look at a two-party system, we are looking at a two-party system because we have not settled on where the power should lie, right? Ideologically, we have seen this flip-flop back and forth throughout our country's history. But the basic argument is, who should have the power, right? In the modern day, in our modern, if we start at the very beginning in the foundation of the Constitution, at the Constitutional Convention, Federalists said that the power should be inside of the federal government because they had tried decentralized power with the Articles of Confederation and it was not successful. Anti-Federalists said, no. We want to protect slavery. We want to protect our agrarian society. And that requires a certain level of power at the state level, which is why, right, we get the first 10 amendments to the Constitution are ratified shortly after a Constitution, because that was the Southerners in the anti-Federalist way of saying, we'll agree to your Constitution if you give us these first 10 what we now consider to be the Bill of Rights, these first 10 amendments, right? With the 10th Amendment saying that anything that's not expressly listed in this Constitution then is the responsibility of the states, which is why we're currently having these voter arguments right now, right? It leads to why we're seeing state legislatures pass all of these repressive bills to stop Black and brown people from voting, where the House of Representatives passed the John Lewis Civil Rights Act, right? So we're seeing this dichotomy of where power lies. So that's why you have two parties, right? You have two parties because there is not a consensus about where the power should lie. And present day Republicans believe that power should lie with the states. Present day Democrats believe that the power should lie with the federal government. Now, the problem then becomes for Blacks or people that have been oppressed or disenfranchised is at what place of power are you going to be treated more equally? If the power lies inside of the federal government, do they have a better track record of treating you fairly? Or if the power lies with the state governments, do they have a better track record of treating you fairly? So that's the thread that's consistently here that I think that students don't really understand, that at the ideological level, right, there is this tug of war that's happening, and then our oppression is on top of that. And that when we choose parties or when we make ideological decisions about what we're going to support and what we're not going to support, and what party we're going to vote for and what party we're not going to vote for, that the underbelly of that is that there is an ideological conversation that's happening back and forth. Now, I know that's a lot, right? I know that's a lot, and I'm not asking you to add that into your paper, but I believe this is a teaching moment so people that are in the audience that'll look back at this understand this tug of war that's happening, and that these parties are sat on top of that, on top of this real debated argument. And we see it play out, right? We see it play out in Congress. We see it play out in the Senate, right? And we see it ideologically, right? Joe Manchin just this past week said, hey, we can't give people too much money because they're not going to go back to work, right? This whole idea of self-responsibility on this ideological scale, being himself to be a more conservative Democrat. So those are the things that you have to take into consideration when you are presenting this information, right? When you're presenting this information that there's been this ideological shift, you should also make sure that in that same breath, that people understand that this ideological shift is in many parts is this battling back and forth inside our republic about where the power should lie. Anyone else open to comment at this point as well?
I also wanted to add, oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Ms. Burns, go ahead, I can wait.
Yes, I also want to add that a major part of my paper, I know I could have did a lot better with explaining and like centering my thesis, but it was also to like be an analysis of how if you're not Democrat and you're Black and you express your Republican ideas, you're automatically like a sellout, a coon, like everyone is pretty much like, you know. And we saw a lot of that happening during the last election as like Blacks were coming out as Trump supporters, and that made a lot of Blacks uncomfortable so as well.
And I think that's your thesis, right? To be honest with you, from reading your paper, your thesis is why are Black people wedded to the Democratic Party? And we know that they are wedded because of the reactions we have seen. And this paper is going to discuss why Blacks are wedded to the party, why then there's pushback then when other people are not wedded to the party. And this is where I see where more exploration can be, if that makes any sense. I truly believe from reading the paper, that's your thesis, right? That's the question you're asking. Why are Blacks so wedded to the Democratic Party?
So Jessica Millward from UC Irvine. I want to congratulate both of you on doing a professional conference at the undergraduate level. This is the best place to start because this is basically how the conferences are going to go from here on out. So congratulate yourself first. Thank you for being brave and showing up. I have one question for Ms. Burns. Well, I have questions for both of you, but my first question for Ms. Burns is because I came late, I'm not sure if you addressed the radical Republicans after Reconstruction. Are you familiar with the radical Republicans after Reconstruction?
Yes, I addressed it in my paper. Let me pull it up really quickly. Pretty much, are you referring to how the radical Republicans pretty much, those were the groups that were trying to fight for the rights of Blacks?
Yes, I'm talking about after the Civil War, thank you, how because Blacks were allowed to vote, they elected Black legislatures. So great, that's my only historical context for you. It sounds like you hit it perfectly. I would also go back, and this is because I do early American history, so I would also go back to the Articles of Confederation and that early national period. Right at that time, the Hamilton musical is taking off, and you can tell a different story. So I really appreciated your paper, and I appreciated your comments, Professor Nelson. Tyrek and I go way back. Tyrek will be working on this project for a long time. So I thank you again, Dr. Nelson, for your comments. Here's my question. You know, you can tell it's a professor when they are long-winded and finally get to their question 20 minutes later. I appreciate both of your papers. Tyrek, I would like you to think a little bit more critically about how Kaepernick has evolved over time. And I think the Twitter dive will also help you. We know that he came out and did a statement about Mumia Abu-Jamal, which was critical, that happened after you wrote this paper, but should be incorporated in. I would like to know for both of you how you are going to negotiate the January 6th so-called insurrection and rebellion, and what that means for Black people and politics and activism. And you might not have that answer right now. I mean, we don't have that answer right now, but I do think there are two major things that happened. One of them being George Floyd, obviously, and the international commitment to Black Lives Matter, which, hey, great, let them take up the job because now we don't have to do it all the time. But also this January 6th, whatever we're calling it, right? And I think you can look at the Black Capitol police officer that allegedly led the insurgents away from the Congress people, or he was just running for his own life. But also kind of how that plays out, because you also saw a lot of Twitter messages saying, see, Kaepernick wasn't wrong. So I just wonder how you both, if you both thought about it and how you could incorporate it into your papers going further.
And before you guys answer that, I want you to write down, and I know if you're going to be scholars, it requires lots of reading. I want you to write down another work. It's called White Backlash. It's recent. And I'm trying to give you a mixture of scholarship, right? You want to make sure that you honor political scientists that have come before you, right? Because that's, I think, my biggest frustration with students in this moment is that, you know, many of them act like Google just invented some of these things,
Yes.
But there are Black scholars who've literally given their lives, like physically given their lives, their health, to the ability for us to do what we do today. And so I want to make sure that you honor that, but also give you some new scholarship. And so I want you to look at what's called White Backlash. It's Immigration, Race, and American Politics. I want you to look at that book. And I also want you to look at Dawson's Behind the Mule. Okay. Those are two other works that I think will help you to think through this. You can, of course, provide your summary comments and answer Dr. Millward. But those two works I definitely want to put on your radar so that you could be looking at it, something from the old and something from the new.
Thank you.
Thank you for those texts. I definitely would love to explore those and you know, add those to my thought process in this research. But to answer the question, I would say that it definitely is important to show those events in history. And I think if we don't show it, then we're kind of missing out a big portion of both of our arguments, which is the fact that, you know, if things aren't spoken out against, if we don't fight towards just better days for not us, but like for the people coming after us, I think that it gives other people power to feel like, you know, instead of us moving forward, that yeah, we're gonna just keep reclining and declining and keep moving backwards. So I think it's important for us to continue to do this research and continue to push forth in terms of what do we need to do and what does activism look like in the next couple of years and for our generation. And I think we have to talk about the pitfalls. I think we have to talk about the just dangerous things that have happened that are direct threats to our freedom, direct threats to us as people.
Excellent, thank you.
I would love to also just add to that and what LaShonda and Professor Millward have offered. I'm Ella Turan, I'm also from UC Irvine, and also know Tyrek, and I want to thank both students for their presentations, but I'm also thinking about building off of LaShonda's comment about this post George Floyd moment. I think it would be really interesting for you to also consider, in the wake of George Floyd, what would it be like to think about the capitalist impulse in all of this, and to think about how the reaction to what Kaepernick has been doing, how has it been impacted by the NFL's reaction, by their resistance, and by the fact that there are capitalist impulses that have driven that as well. I think it's important to think about not only the politics, but the economics of how this is playing out and how it's impacted his career and the moves that he has chosen to make as an activist, despite those things.
So I see the chat blowing up. So let me hop in this chat and see if there's other questions. So Professor Millward says, Tariq, also, how do you measure Kaepernick's literal sacrifice on the activist movement post George Floyd? So that's one question. And then for Ms. Burns, it says, I would also trouble you to think about whether the recent backlash was pro-Democratic Party or anti-Trump. So I'll turn both of those over to you. So Tariq, let me remind you, Mr. Edwards, I apologize. Let me remind you again of the question. How are you measuring Cap's literal sacrifice for this movement, especially post George Floyd? And then Ms. Burns, how are you seeing, or how are you analyzing the recent January 6th events as backlash of pro-Democratic Party or just anti-Trump? And I will open the floor up for you guys to then respond to those.
Okay. I think that's a great question. Absolutely. I think that Colin Kaepernick going out there and sacrificing his livelihood, his job, at the time it was big, and then it kind of died down. And then we see the events of the murder of George Floyd, and we see, to kind of speak to Ella's point about just the capitalist impulses there, because we see organizations like the NBA and the NFL, you know, they're plastering Black Lives Matter on their jerseys, on their fields, and things of that nature. And in a way, to me it's kind of uncomfortable, because when Colin Kaepernick was saying these same ideals of, hey, you know, they're killing us, they're treating us like nothing, you know, people are like, whatever, like, you know, okay, whatever. But then, when I think, especially because we were all at home, we all been quarantined, and we've seen a man, you know, be murdered on TV. Like, I think that woke a lot of people up who were thinking that this was a game. But, you know, for a lot of us, we already knew these things were going on. And I think that woke some people up, that added a catalyst to some people. And I commend the effort that these organizations put forth to say, hey, Black Lives Matter, to say, hey, you know, we're fighting against racial inequality, and we're in line with people that are protesting. But I also think they did those things so they would be in the loop of things in terms of popularity, and it was almost like a trend. And I didn't necessarily like that in with the organizations putting forth these comments now. Like, why now when these things have been happening? You know, George Floyd was not the first one that this has happened to. And I do think that I definitely have conflict with that it took all of that just for, you know, these billion-dollar organizations and sport teams and businesses to say, oh yeah, we stand with, you know, people against police brutality and against racial inequality. And I think some of those people were genuine, but I think all of that was not. I think a lot of it was, hey, this is a trend. Let's put this on our jerseys. Let's put this on our field so that we can pull in more of an audience. Like, it wasn't more about the issue itself and trying to fix the issue in society. It was about, hey, let's pull in some more coins for us.
So Mr. Edwards, what I would also consider you and implore you to look at as a comparison is to look at Bloody Sunday. Mm-hmm. Because the George Floyd killing in many ways was our Bloody Sunday moment. Mm-hmm. A white political scholar made a comment a couple of years ago at an APSA convention, he argued, and I can't remember his name on the paper, but he argued that we couldn't get to this place again, that we couldn't get to a place of this widespread protest because we had normalized violence, right? Wow. That was his argument. His argument was that the normalization of violence made it difficult for us to have another Bloody Sunday moment, for us to move past it. And I remember meeting with him afterwards to tell him I believed that to be this true. And I think this George Floyd event shows this to be this true. And I think that you will find there that there were capitalistic sympathies or capitalistic ideas even then during the Bloody Sunday explosion, right? Because it forced everybody then have to deal with, as you stated, what we as Black people always know, right? Which is why the whole Meghan Markle interview, the whole things that are going on, Black people are like, yeah, and I mean, the Queen and them invented racism. What are you talking about, right? These are our everyday realities. However, when they are then exposed and then they become exposed to the white conscious, right? It creates a different set of realities that then have different reactions. And so if you do that comparison, I believe if you dig more there, you will start to see a lot of the things that repeated. I'll stop here because I want to make sure Ms. Burns has an opportunity to answer her question. Mark Twain would say that history doesn't repeat itself, but it definitely rhymes. Mm-hmm. So Ms. Burns, I'll leave the floor open for you.
Yes, so I do believe that the recent backlash was both pro-Democratic Party and anti-Trump, because of course matters were heightened because of, you know, the atmosphere we were in with dealing with the election as well. So, but still being Black and Republican is still not accepted in the Black community. So I think it was both anti-Trump and the and pro-Democratic Party.
And Ms. Burns, something on that piece that I would encourage you to kind of dig at that thread of Black conservatism, Black conservatism. And there's a work, I'll have to email it to you to remind you. I know I'm like a professor, always throwing another book at you to read, but and the reason I prefer books for students is because oftentimes journal articles, especially if they're in the top journals, they can become really wonky with all of the data. And so I love to try to give books because I think there's way more context for the data. There's way more space to provide context for the data. So even if you don't understand all the charts, you can at least read what's around it and understand what's going on. And I'll send you the work. But I think what you have to really dig out there is this thread of Black conservatism that's lost. I know that Dr. Michael Fongtroy has written a book on Black Republicans, but I think it's just bigger than just Black Republicans. I would encourage you to look up his work, Dr. Michael Fongtroy's work on Black Republicans. But I think what's even deeper than that is Black conservatism, right? Because I think that's the thread that you talk about very well in your paper, right? There's something that you did very well here, and the historical analysis that you provided, you did an excellent job doing it. It just needed to be more focused, I think, towards a thesis. But you do an excellent job, which is why when Ms. Millward asked, had you mentioned the Black radical Republicans, I'm like, yep, she did. She did a great job in doing those things. And so that I think is the thread, right? Is this Black conservatism that you talk about in your paper. But I think that needs to be explored more, because I think that will then speak to this idea of this dynamic of pro Democratic Party, anti-Trump, all of those things in between, right? Because as you stated in your paper, we see a lot of Blacks that still vote for the Democratic Party are then oftentimes the most conservative, right, of those voters. So I think those are great things. We have another 5 minutes. I want to leave the floor open for anything else if people have to leave or whatever. I just want to congratulate both of you guys again on doing an excellent job of coming to the conference prepared and being ready to be scrutinized for all intents and purposes.
Yes, I see there's another question. I think someone, Dr. Jessica Millward asks what is next for the projects. For me, personally, I'm going to expand my research. So I'm still going to work on this same paper just to have it and reference it and stuff, because like this is a topic I'm really passionate about, and I like to speak about it in my political science classes. So definitely expanding and then, passing my knowledge forward.
Thank y'all for the platform to just speak on some topics we're really passionate about. And to echo my colleague, the future Dr. Burns, I am looking forward to furthering my research, and definitely looking at the text that Dr. Nelson spoke of and all the different historical things that everyone has spoken about, and just to improve the paper and to keep going, because these are both very timely topics, and they're not just gonna die after this year. So I think we're gonna have continuous things to read and continuous things to look at to just keep doing our research. So that's the
Excuse me,
plan.
Mr. Edwards, excuse me.
Mhm.
That is not the answer. Thank you, Ms. Burns. I look forward to your scholarship in the future. That is not the answer I was looking for. What do you have planned next year, Mr. Edwards?
Oh, okay. Well, so for me, I plan to go into graduate school and
Where?
for where I'm still deciding. I'm still deciding. I haven't
So
made.
you've applied.
I have. Yeah,
He's
I've
been
applied. I've gotten
accepted.
some.
Oh,
I got
he's
some
applied and been
experience.
accepted. Okay, so now you got about to get the Black Mama talk, because I was just getting ready to say, everybody can be a student, but everybody can't be a scholar.
See,
Because it takes a different level of commitment. Anybody can learn, anybody can be a student, but I'm looking at two scholars. And so because I'm looking at two scholars, there's an expectation that you guys are going to continue the scholarship. And she tried to ask you nicely. So now I'm gonna come in and say it not so nicely. So what all of us in this community are saying to you is that we expect to see graduate level work papers, and that we also expect you to reach out to any of us so that you can co-author on these papers so that they can be published. That's what we are saying. Now, we didn't want to say that on a recording, but it had to be said. So I'm gonna tell you right now, that's what's being asked of you. So let's you got 2 minutes for both of y'all to rehearse those answers and talk about who you're gonna reach out to about furthering this work so that you can pair up with what one or any of us that are on this call so that we can get this research published. So I will open the floor for you to re-answer the question.
Yeah, you both made me have to turn on my camera for that. That's the answer I wanted. Thank you, Dr. Nelson. You both have the floor. Go.
All right. So I'll say I would love to work with any of you all of you. I'm gonna say all of you, to just help me publish this research as I further my scholarship.
Yeah, I would also like to work with all of you. I really appreciate the feedback. And so, yeah, I'm actually only a sophomore undergrad, so I know my paper really needs a lot of work. So I would definitely love to work on that.
Ms. Burns, I'd like to read the whole paper because it sounds like what you wrote in that paper is not what you presented to us here today. I would very much like to read the entire paper so that I can get a better sense of the work that you've done. So I'm gonna put my email address in this chat so that you can email me your paper so that I have a better sense of what it is that you are doing, what you're moving through. Because based on what Dr. Nelson is saying, baby, I'm lost between what you've said here in front of us versus what you put down in that paper. I want to see this rich history. I want to see these deep analyses that you did. I want to be a part of that. So I'm putting my email address. And Tyrek, what schools did you get into with this half information?
Oh wow.
What are you doing?
I'm gonna put on blast. I mean, wow, this has been recorded.
This is what I'll do. I'll stop the recording so you can answer truthfully.
Okay.